Hi, my name is Ophi YouTube Videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian, and I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things. And I assumed when I began to work on this video that I would need to admit in my intro that I was rehashing old and maybe not so relevant discourse, that I am leaning into something of a fandom renaissance for a series that I have been very, very invested in for about half my life at this point, and therefore reheating decade-old nachos. And then I found a post from literally just last week that proved to me that the nachos are, in fact, somehow still hot. This is still, I guess, relevant discourse, and apparently a widely misunderstood element of the Hunger Games series. So today, I would like to talk about the epilogue to the Hunger Games Trilogy by Suzanne Collins. Specifically, I would like to talk about criticisms of the epilogue, about how I think that the clickbait feminism critique of the end of the trilogy is completely misguided in any broader context of the series or what it tries to convey throughout. This is a feminist media analysis and not a recap of the Hunger Games series. I will not be slowing down to explain the conceit of the original trilogy or the plot of the series. I'm sorry, this video assumes that you will at least have seen the movies a few years ago, or that you are content with background noise that will only sort of make sense to you. I am planning on making more content about the Hunger Games in the future, and I could certainly be talked into making an everything you need to know about the Hunger Games to follow my other videos but not need to read the books video after I finish rereading this series, but this isn't that yet. I am also planning on making other videos about the Hunger Games in the future, so if you are into this video, please make sure you subscribe so you can catch those as I sprinkle them in amongst my heavier feminist analysis and other pop culture commentary here on this channel. This video is, of course, going to contain spoilers for the entire original Hunger Games trilogy, and also a couple of spoilers for Sunrise on the Reaping, the Hamish Abernathy narrated prequel that came out last month and kicked my long-standing fixation on this series back into overdrive. So I kind of assumed that we had collectively, as a society, moved on from the clickbait feminism and low media literacy take of the end of the Hunger Games trilogy is bad on account of girl bosses shouldn't have babies. But I suppose I shouldn't have assumed that. It was so very easy to find a post from as recently as a week ago at the time of scripting that hit pretty much every note I was going to summarize anyway for people's criticisms of the epilogue to the trilogy. And we will read the epilogue in full in this video, but not yet. I'm not going to link to the post that I saw. I'm not trying to dogpile anybody, but it was basically a summation of a lot of takes that I've seen over my years in and around the Hunger Games fandom. Takes that range from bad faith interpretations, poor media literacy, the aforementioned clickbait feminism, or a little bit of all of it just mixing in together. The Post posited that the epilogue to the Hunger Games trilogy was bad because the ending, the happy children playing on the meadow at the site of a mass grave, was actually only a happy ending for Peeta and not for Katniss. I scrolled far enough in the ensuing discussion to see words like coercion, arguments being made like, I don't know about you, but I take women at their word when they tell me they don't want something. There are a ton of different angles that people take to voice their displeasure with the epilogue of the Hunger Games trilogy, but I want to start with one in specific. Again and again in this thread and many others, there's an argument that gets cited where there's this idea of Katniss Everdeen canonically never wanting children. There are about 3 pieces of evidence I think we can cite for this from the books, and 2 of them are from long before the epilogue. We're going to go over all 3 of them, but there is a lot of book between each of these instances where this explicitly comes up, and there are many pieces of relevant context to each situation in which Katniss Everdeen voices something that we can discern as explicit feelings on the concept of having children. So, part 1, how does Katniss tell us she feels? The first and most commonly cited piece of evidence for the argument that Katniss Everdeen explicitly never wanted children in a way she was never ever allowed to change her mind about happens in Chapter 1. A chapter in which characters in many books say things that are set up very conclusively by the narrative to carry a different context on a reread, perhaps, when you know when things are headed. Or, if you're doing BuzzFeed levels of media and feminist analysis, I guess it means that if they say something in chapter 1, it's later out of character for a 16-year-old girl to have different opinions and priorities at 32 on account of, yeah, in the first chapter of The Hunger Games, Katniss does tell Gale that she does not want children. I will read to you.
We could do it, Gale says quietly. What? I ask. Leave the district. Run off. Live in the woods. You and I. We could make it, says Gale. I don't know how to respond. The idea is so preposterous. If we didn't have so many kids, he adds quickly. They're not our kids, of course, but they might as well be. Gale's 2 little brothers and a sister, Prim, and you may as well throw in our mothers too, because how would they live without us? Who would fill those mouths that are always asking for more? With both of us hunting daily, there are still nights when game has to be swapped for lard or shoelaces or wool, still nights when we go to bed with our stomachs growling. I never want to have kids, I say.
Okay. So, yes, she did say it. As a 16-year-old girl, directly following a contextualizing paragraph that touches both on the way that she is parentified and on the way that her physical, tangible needs are going unmet due to starvation and poverty. If you turn off the entire rest of your critical analysis here for the rest of the series, yeah, you're right. Katniss canonically never wanted to have kids. She said it. She says a lot of other things that I don't think we all universally agree to be true, especially when she's being super cruel about herself. But if we are accepting, for some reason, that Katniss is a completely reliable narrator with perfect foresight of everything she might ever want in the future, even a future where her tangible physical needs are met and starvation and poverty are not a concern, a future where she's not a scared, hungry 16-year-old girl forced to care for both her younger sister and her mother in the wake of her father's death? Yeah, Katniss said she doesn't want to have children. But if we continue to look even just at this same passage, at how her conversation with Gale devolves, we get even more clues that Katniss's declaration of never wanting to have children here is situational. It's just that her situation, living in Panem under this system of oppression, is so extreme and seems so complete that she can't imagine any alternative, let alone the one that will eventually be presented in the epilogue. Continuing from chapter 1 here.
I might, if I didn't live here, says Gale. But you do, I say, irritated. Forget it, he snaps back. The conversation feels all wrong. Leave? How could I leave Prim, who is the only person in the world I'm certain I love? And Gale is devoted to his family. We can't leave. So why bother talking about it? And even if we did, where did this stuff about having kids come from? There's never been anything romantic between Gale and me. When we met, I was a skinny 12-year-old, and although he was only 2 years older, he already looked like a man. It took a long time for us to even become friends, to stop haggling over every trade and begin helping each other out. Besides, if he wants kids, Gale won't have any trouble finding a wife. He's good looking, he's strong enough to handle the work in the mines, and he can hunt. You can tell by the way the girls whisper about him when he walks by in school that they want him. It makes me jealous, but not for the reason people would think. Good hunting partners are hard to find.
There are so many things to unpack here, one of which being on just a purely petty level, so that's why I'm putting it first. If we must take Katniss at her word for never wanting children in chapter 1, we also must take her at her word for her clear lack of romantic interest in Gale, no? But I will also say, I think that the ship war element of the unending is the epilogue good or bad question is both unavoidable and the least interesting one, so let's table it for right now. I think we see a few things from the way that this conversation devolves. Gale's "I might if I didn't live here" right after fantasizing about running off in the woods puts him, at the beginning of the series, in a significantly more rebellious place that Katniss arguably never quite matches him at. I don't think that it's a particularly hot take to say that Gale Hawthorne is more actively rebellious than Katniss in nearly every aspect, and I say that not to undermine the fundamentally radical nature of Katniss's later actions. We'll actually be getting into that later as well. There's a case study, though, that could be made, I think, of the ways in which Gale Hawthorne, Hamish Abernathy, and Katniss Everdeen all grew up in the same sort of radicalization pressure cooker, and the different factors that ratcheted things up to varying degrees for each of them. Like, at the beginning of Sunrise on the Reaping, Haymitch is not quite as outspokenly radical or rebellious as you might go in expecting, knowing his quote from the tribute interview was that with twice as many tributes as usual, the games would still be 100% as stupid as usual. Breaks the law by going into the woods and selling alcohol, but he begins the story wanting to try to slide under the radar with his true love, Lenora Dove. He starts his story worrying about her being too rebellious, worrying about his family's reputation of being rebels impacting his ability to carve out a quiet life with the woman he loves. Gale, we can infer, is at least able to imagine doing some of that quiet life carving outside of the confines of Panem. And just running away itself is a revolutionary idea, because District 12 is fenced in. I feel like a much less big deal is made out of this in the movies, but they are contained in the district inside of an electrified fence. Katniss and Gale, similar to Haymitch when he went into the woods, are both engaging in an act of rebellion. It's also an act of rebellion to own weapons, to hunt. The woods isn't even always electrified, and Katniss makes it sound like it's not completely unheard of to sneak through to the other side, but it is not legal for them to be in the woods at all. To Katniss, this is not a political act, it's a means with which to feed her family, and we can infer that it's much the same for Gale, even if it's also a political act. It's more a political act when he's thinking about turning going into the woods into a thing that he would run off and do and try to make it, and not a thing that he's doing before sneaking back into the confines of the district. Like I said, Gale is a bit further down the pipeline towards his eventual very much let's burn it all down mindset in the later books than Katniss is, because Katniss is so solidly in survival mode. And here's the thing about the entire series, with the exception of the epilogue. Katniss Everdeen is always in survival mode. Not just from the Reaping or from the morning of the Reaping, but from long before the narrative even begins. We meet Katniss Everdeen as a 16-year-old girl on the morning of the Reaping, and it's the 4th year that her name has been entered into the ritual child death pageant. Every year her name has been entered, she has taken a tessera ration from the government for herself, her mother, and her younger sister, resulting in greatly increased odds that her name will be the one drawn in the Reaping. We only know that Katniss's birthday is on May 8th because she mentions trying to stay alive until then, until she could enter her name into the Reaping more times and be eligible to increase her odds and receive rations from the government. So she was already very, very hungry before she became eligible for the Reaping at 12. Katniss only made it through until she could get those tessera rations, because after Peeta threw her the bread in the rain, she couldn't meet his eye when she kept looking at him afterwards. She saw the dandelion in the spring when she looked down and remembered hunting and gathering with her father before his death in the mines. Katniss has been in survival mode since before her father's death in the mines. She seems to have been a happy child before that, volunteering first to sing in school, as Peeta remembers later in the cave, making little craft rope necklaces while she sings The Hanging Tree and freaks her mother out because she doesn't understand either what she is singing or how much trouble it could get them in. And we are very clearly fed chapter after chapter worth of information about how clearly this sudden and intense parentification has impacted Katniss. Which, I don't know, I guess I just think means that it makes sense why she might be 4 years into parenting her younger sister and thinking, oh my god, I never want to do this again. And also why, in a world where suddenly the context around having children and trying to keep them safe and fed is much different and much less demanding, her opinions on whether or not that's worth doing again might eventually shift. I know I said I'm not going to be completely retelling the entire conceit of the Hunger Games series in this video, and that's still true, but I do also think that it's meaningful to take just a few seconds and consider what it even means to be or to have a child in Panem, and especially the version of Panem that Katniss lives in and has grown up in survival mode in. It feels silly to say children and their innocence and their punishment despite their innocence is a critical theme in the Hunger Games, right? It is the ritual child death pageant book series. We all know that. But I do feel like there are some YA books that are about children and adolescence because children and adolescents are an important thematic element to the series. And there are some YA books that are about teenagers because that is who will buy their book and go see the movie adaptation. The Hunger Games is, of course, the former. Children are a really important theme in both the narrative of the story itself, obviously, but also in the world of Panem. The punishing and killing of the children is the spectacle. Though the adults in the districts are also exploited, policed, and brutalized, those things do not happen on the screen of the Capitol TV the way that the child death pageant does. Reading from the first chapter again. The rules of the Hunger Games are simple. In punishment for the uprising, each of the 12 districts must provide one girl and one boy, called tributes, to participate. The 24 tributes will be imprisoned in a vast outdoor arena that could hold anything from a burning desert to a frozen wasteland. Over a period of several weeks, the competitors must fight to the death. The last tribute standing wins. Taking the kids from our districts, forcing them to kill one another while we watch. This is the Capitol's way of reminding us how totally we are at their mercy, how little chance we would stand of surviving another rebellion. Whatever words they use, the real message is clear. Look how we take your children and sacrifice them, and there's nothing you can do. If you lift a finger, we will destroy every last one of you, just as we did in District 13. To make it humiliating as well as torturous, the Capitol requires us to treat the Hunger Games as a festivity, a sporting event, pitting every district against the others. The last tribute alive receives a life of ease back home, and their district will be showered with prizes, largely consisting of food. All year, the Capitol will show the winning district gifts of grain and oil, and even delicacies like sugar, while the rest of us battle starvation. To Katniss, there is no way to have a child without subjecting them to the risk of the games, to the horrors of living in a society where this happens, or to starvation. As we've already discussed, Katniss finds the idea of running off and trying to live in the woods so unthinkable that she immediately dismisses it. She refuses to even entertain the concept. This is something Katniss does all the time, not just with Gale, when she's presented with concepts that are just a little bit more existential than she's currently prepared for. Peeta is chapters ahead of her on the I want to show them that I'm more than just a piece in their games front, and her immediate response when he tells her about that before they go into the arena is, "No offense, but who cares, Peeta?" Which is, by the way, a line that I love the same way that I love her snappy, "But you do live here," to Gale's "I might want kids if I didn't live here," because just like Katniss's feeling on having children or not changes once she does not live here in this version of Panem that she was currently just trying to survive in during that conversation, her feelings on wanting to show the Capitol that she's more than just a piece in their games also evolve and change as the circumstances do. There is one difference there. It's not that safety makes her more able to think about the future or existential things, but it is very related to the epilogue, because it is that her love for a child has, for the second time in the series by then, you could argue, spurred her into a radical action. And we are going to be talking primarily about the epilogue today once I'm finished with getting this other part from Catching Fire out of the way. So we will be discussing Rue so much more in the coming sections, but she is, of course, all over this because she is all over the epilogue and all over so much of what we can actually use to discern Katniss's feelings about children. In Catching Fire, Katniss once again gives us an explicit glimpse at her thoughts about having children and whether or not she would like to. She and Peeta are in the arena for the quarter quell, and I'm sorry, I think I'm going to have a section about the fake pregnancy in both this video and my upcoming Peeta video. We are tabling it for right now. We will get back to it today, and we will get back to it again in the future. But this is during the part of Catching Fire where Katniss and Peeta are having their argument on the beach about which of them should get to die so that the other can go home. Finnick wakes up after a lightning bolt hitting the tree startles Katniss and Peeta apart from their big makeout. I will read. "I can't sleep anymore," he says. "One of you should rest." Only then does he seem to notice our expressions, the way we're wrapped around each other. "Or both of you. I can watch alone." Peeta won't let him, though. "It's too dangerous," he says. "I'm not tired. You lie down, Katniss." I don't object, because I do need to sleep if I'm to be of any use keeping him alive. I let him lead me over to where the others are. He puts the chain with the locket around my neck, then rests his hand over the spot where our baby would be. "You're going to make a great mother, you know," he says. He kisses me one last time and goes back to Finnick. His reference to the baby signals that our timeout from the games is over, that he knows the audience will be wondering why he hasn't used the most persuasive argument in his arsenal, that sponsors must be manipulated. But as I stretch out on the sand, I wonder, could it be more? Like a reminder to me that I could still one day have kids with Gale? Well, if that was it was a mistake. Because for one thing, that's never been part of my plan. And for another, if only one of us can be a parent, anyone can see that it should be PETA. As I drift off, I try to imagine that world. Somewhere in the future with no games, no capital, a place like the meadow in the song I sang to Rue as she died, where PETA's child could be safe. And no joke, the next chapter literally begins, "When I wake, I have a brief, delicious feeling of happiness that is somehow connected to PETA." But sure, it's totally out of the blue for them to end up together, he doesn't make her happy, blah blah blah. There's another piece of context in Catching Fire I'm also comfortable throwing into the bucket here, but I do want to separate it out because this is one of the most vicious spoilers for Sunrise on the Reaping. Another piece of important context for why Katniss Everdeen would not want to have children is earlier in the book, before the Quarter Quell's All-Star theme has been announced. I stare into the darkness, thinking about my conversation with Haymitch. Everything he said was true about the Capitol's expectations, my future with PETA, even his last comment. Of course I could do a lot worse than PETA. That isn't really the point, though, is it? One of the few freedoms we have in District 12 is the right to marry who we want or not marry at all, and now even that has been taken away from me. I wonder if President Snow will insist we have children. If we do, they'll have to face the reaping each year. And wouldn't it be something to see the child of not one but two victors chosen for the arena? Victor's children have been in the ring before. It always causes a lot of excitement and generates talk about how the odds are not in that family's favor. But it happens too frequently to just be about odds. Gail's convinced the Capitol does it on purpose, rigs the drawings to add extra drama. Given all the trouble I've caused, I've probably guaranteed any child of mine a spot in the games. I think of Haymitch, unmarried, no family, blotting out the world with drink. He could have had his choice of any woman in the district, and he chose solitude. Not solitude. That sounds too peaceful. More like solitary confinement. Was it because, having been in the arena, he knew it was better than risking the alternative? I had a taste of that alternative when they called Prim's name on Reaping Day, and I watched her walk to the stage to her death. But as her sister, I could take her place. An option forbidden to our mother. So, first of all, it is very explicitly the idea of having children and having them sent into the Hunger Games that is such a bleak and unthinkable future for Katniss. Again, a piece of context that is no longer relevant at the end of the series. Once again, a material reality for her that feels absolute. So absolute that even in this scene, the most rebellious thought that she has is to run away, not to attempt to harness any of the leverage she might have after the Barry stunt and join Gale in burn it all down mode, but to just try to find safety elsewhere. Katniss is only just starting to reach the we could do it, live in the woods phase that Gale was at in book 1, and he is miles ahead of her. Exactly what I mean about him being more outwardly rebellious than her. And also, in this quote, and this is why this tiny little chapter here is a spoiler for Sunrise on the Reaping, here's a thing I won't say terribly frequently about Gale Hawthorne, but I will when it's fair. He's right. He's right about the Capitol rigging Victor's children into the games. We saw that confirmed in Haymitch's games. It didn't even seem to be the focus of that year's games. It just was one of many things that was happening. It's really brutal. Seeing it play out is really brutal. It's a very effective means of continuing to punish your victors. But okay, with those few pieces out of the way where Katniss explicitly speaks about her feelings on children, let's move into part 2. How does Katniss show us she feels? So in this section, I do want to unpack some things that we've already touched on, but come at them from a different angle. As promised, we will be discussing Rue, and we also need to discuss Prim in a bit of a different light than we already have when I mentioned Katniss's intense parentification and survival mode. I mean, we already heard a lot of how Katniss feels from Katniss herself in the passages I read earlier, right? Gale suggested that they take off and live in the woods, and Katniss said that Prim, her sister, is the only person in the world she's certain she loves. Yeah, Katniss is extremely parentified, and yes, her relationship with her mother is forever altered by the way that she is abandoned in the wake of her father's death. But there is no point in the series where Katniss seems to resent Prim for that, where she seems to hate having to take care of her or seems at all unhappy with being around a child. Which is a very simple point, but it's so simple and so obvious that it's why I wanted to start here. It's why I wanted to start with the arguments against the epilogue being silly just on the basis of Katniss's character not allowing for an interpretation where she would never ever want children to make any sense. Katniss loves her sister, and she loves her in a way that is far and away beyond what is expected, honestly, either in this universe or in Panem. And also, this is why I'm talking about it as Prim and Rue and Prim. I'm not really talking about Primrose Everdeen as a character, and maybe I will feel differently after my reread, but I think that it's because there just isn't much of a character there for Prim. There are a few notes, of course, things Katniss loves about her. I could tell you a little bit about her as a character, but other than a glimpse into how Katniss feels about children and the world she lives in and how impossible it is to keep children safe there, Prim serves primarily first as the driving force to get Katniss into the story in a more interesting way than bad luck, and from then on as an albatross. Susan S.M. Tam wrote an essay called Worst Games to Play? Deconstructing Resolution in the Hunger Games for an academic collection called Politics of Panem, and a Nuance Corner friend was kind enough to send that my way. Thank you. Because bestie Susan had already discussed so many of the things that I wanted to get to in today's video. I'm going to read from it a little bit now, because Susan also pointed out this Rue and Prim and Rue thing, and also because in terms of things that Katniss feels but doesn't explicitly tell us, the point Susan makes about Katniss not considering herself a child actually pulled me up short. It's not something I would have really thought to put into words, even though it's so true and so obvious about this character. Susan writes,
Centrally, Katniss does not seem to consider herself a child. Instead, she reserves that label for characters such as Prim and Rue, the small, innocent, and ultimately victimized characters who Katniss seeks to protect precisely because of their childness.
and of course, there are also more obvious parallels between Prim and Rue, even just down to their small stature and their flower names, but I'm going to focus on what feels relevant for the rest of this conversation, which are the points I've already made, about Rue being all over the epilogue, and about it being important thematically that Katniss's love for a child spurs her into these revolutionary and radical acts more than once. Because Katniss's love for Prim is obvious. It's obvious narratively. It's obvious in how she behaves in just the act of volunteering at all. And it's also a seemingly transferable sort of love. I promise we're still going to get back to Rue, but let's stick with the sister just a little bit so that I can unpack a point that I sort of glossed over last time I was recording. So obviously, Katniss volunteering for Prim is what I meant earlier, when I said that her arena funeral for Rue is something you could argue as either the first or the second in a series of big rebellious gestures of Katniss's. But I do genuinely think that's arguable, right? And I want to talk through why. Katniss volunteers for Prim, and we could say that that is a big revolutionary act because it is not a societal norm in this universe. When Katniss volunteers, the passage reads, "There's some confusion on the stage. District 12 hasn't had a volunteer in decades, and the protocol has become rusty. The rule is that once a tribute's name has been pulled from the ball, another eligible boy, if a boy's name has been read, or girl, if a girl's name has been read, can step forward to take his or her place. In some districts, in which winning the reaping is such a great honor people are eager to risk their lives, the volunteering is complicated. But in District 12, where the word tribute is pretty much synonymous with the word corpse, volunteers are all but extinct." "Lovely," says Effie Trinket. "But I believe there's a small manner of introducing the reaping winner and asking for volunteers. And if one does come forth, then She trails off, unsure herself. The thing I'm calling into question here is not whether or not Katniss's love for a child spawned her into a grand gesture, but whether or not the volunteering itself counts as rebellious. If we are counting it as rebellious, you were probably annoyed by what I said earlier about Gale starting the series more outwardly rebellious than Katniss. But, there is an official mechanism for volunteers, and she is easily recognized as one. All the mayor has to say is, "What does it matter? Let her come forward." And it is the love for her sister that is revolutionary. It's the self-sacrifice in the gesture, and her district does reward it like the act of courage that it is. To the everlasting credit of the people of District 12, not one person claps. Not even the ones holding betting slips, the ones who are usually beyond caring. Possibly because they know me from the Hob, or knew my father, or have encountered Prim, who no one can help loving. So instead of acknowledging applause, I stand there unmoving while they take part in the boldest form of dissent they can manage. Silence, which says we do not agree. We do not condone. All of this is wrong. Then something unexpected happens. At least, I don't expect it, because I don't think of District 12 as a place that cares about me. But a shift has occurred since I stepped up to take Prim's place, and now it seems I have become someone precious. At first one, then another, then almost every member of the crowd touches the 3 middle fingers of their left hand to their lips and holds it out to me. It is an old and rarely used gesture of our district, occasionally seen at funerals. It means thanks. It means admiration. It means goodbye to someone you love. So you can sound off in the comments, because while I do have to imagine Katniss volunteering like that to take her sister's place in the middle of the ceremony the way she did, put her on the radar of the rebels, I can't quite conceive of this as a fully rebellious in nature action, just the same way that I don't conceive of sneaking out into the woods and then also back in as fully rebellious. I guess there's maybe also a larger conversation to be had there. Maybe there's a better word I could be using to delineate this difference. But for me, and for this series in particular, where we have capital R rebels, I feel that to be capital R rebellious is to have at least some capacity of imagining a better world, and at least some concept of how you might play into either enjoying that or at least making it happen. And I don't think there's any of that yet in Katniss when she volunteers for her sister. I think there is only a panic, a desire to play by whatever rules she can play by in order to keep her sister safe, a thing that's been a part of the survival mode she's been locked in since she was a child. So I don't know that I class Katniss volunteering for her sister as outright rebellious. I think it sounds wrong, but I don't think it sounds wrong to class it as a revolutionary act. And I think that the way that the other citizens in District 12 respond to it does help us to frame it that way. Your love for your sibling is not supposed to transcend your fear of the reaping. But whether or not we're classing the volunteering itself as a revolutionary act, maybe just the fact that there is technically a mechanism for it kneecaps my argument, I feel that there is no argument that the next act I want to discuss is outright revolutionary. And as Susan reminds us in her paper, even Katniss melds the sister she loved enough to volunteer for with the dying girl she sang to in the arena and covered in flowers. I will read again.
Rue's last request, that Katniss sing to her, immediately demonstrates the power of the signifier of child in Katniss's worldview. Katniss, throat tight with tears, hoarse from smoke and fatigue, reflects that if this is Rue's last request, I have to at least try. This slippage is telling, as is Katniss's choice of song. A simple lullaby, one we sing fretful, hungry babies to sleep with. Katniss's conflation of Prim and Rue demonstrates the solidity and power with which the signifier of child manifests itself for her, and the song she sings is equally revealing. It is a lullaby which promises safety and love in a pastoral meadow, one in which we could imagine that both Prim, the child who heals animals and raises goats and tames strays, and Rue, who sings with the mockingjays and can fly, bird-like, from tree to tree, would make their natural home. However, this natural imagery does not remain within the realm of Katniss's song, nor can it be contained within the framework of childhood innocence which Katniss asserts so strongly. As Katniss wreathes Rue's body in flowers, pastoral associations become blurred. With blossoms in beautiful shades of violet and yellow and white, Katniss disguises the reality of Rue's wound and death with the trapping of the Arcadia her song has just evoked, covering the ugly wound, wreathing her face, weaving her hair with bright colors. Of course, there is a highly positive valence to this action. As Katniss honors Rue, she lays claim to nature, made so deadly in the space of the arena, to assert Rue's humanity. Katniss wants to demonstrate that Rue was more than just a piece in their games, and so am I. And in her act of care, she disrupts the brutal mechanisms of the adult dystopian world with this evocation of the childhood which Katniss asserts Rue should have had. At the same time, however, the appropriation of natural imagery and its associations with childhood, and a sense of safe, protected childhood at that, points towards a simultaneous disruption. The lullaby has eased the child towards death rather than sleep, and as Katniss looks on Rue one last time, she reflects that she really could be asleep in that meadow after all. The meadow of Katniss's song, the space of perpetual security and love, has become Rue's grave, prefiguring the actual graveyard which Katniss's children will play in later in the trilogy's epilogue. As death is equated with inhibiting this space, the question of its attainability is raised. In Katniss's world, this scene seems to suggest the child can only remain good and safe, secure in the pastoral natural world through death.
Okay. I feel like you're likely seeing what I mean by now about Rue being all over the epilogue, if that didn't already immediately make sense to you, but let's hold that thought a little while longer. Before I close this chapter, because honestly the whole video is also kind of about how Katniss actually feels versus how she tells us she feels, I do want to take a little bit of stock of what I feel we've read in the passages so far. Both when Katniss tells Gale about her desire not to have children and when she sings Rue the lullaby, a specific thing that comes up is hunger. When she's thinking about their siblings and their mother, she thinks who would feed those mouths that are always asking for more. And when she describes the lullaby, she specifically mentions soothing fretful, hungry babies to sleep because they don't have any food to give them. Food and hunger very much, I would say, count as major themes of this series, as much as children themselves do, up there with war ethics and propaganda and the question of real or not real. It's something to keep in mind, both for why Katniss does not want to have children at the beginning of the series, and also for why it makes me lose my mind, in a good way, that she specifically calls out chubby toddler legs in the epilogue. Actually, now that I have explained to you so much of my reasoning for why I don't have much patience for the argument that Katniss could never truly want children, I do want to get into the last piece of context that gets thrown out for the arguments that try to really stick the landing that she was coerced into having children. What I want to do is tell you about that, tell you about the ways that I think people misinterpret it, and then do a close reading of the entire epilogue, including that line, before we get into some of the other criticisms that people have of the end of the trilogy, beyond pretending that it's purely a characterization thing. If you've ever been any sort of dedicated Everlark shipper, you already know exactly which epilogue line I'm about to have to defend, I think, but it would truly feel like a gaping hole in this video not to acknowledge it, no matter how outright silly I personally think the argument is. I, of course, mean the line in the bittersweet Happy Chubby Baby Toddlers on a Graveyard epilogue, where Katniss says that it took her 5, 10, 15 years to agree, but Peeta wanted them so badly. This line is where so many of the bad faith takes come from, honestly where most of the clickbait feminism is coming from, I think, though at least some of those arguments probably would get trotted out without any real consideration for whether or not they would sound correct, even if Katniss actually did have some genuinely out of character line in the epilogue about how she's actually known she wanted to be a mother since she was a little girl. The "but Peeta wanted them so badly" line is why people use the word coercion, and why I'm sure that the fact that I arranged this for Peeta wanted them so badly to be in the middle of the video means that I will have angry comments left about me not front-loading 5, 10, 15 as the reason people hate the epilogue. But to really dismiss this for you, I want to finish that stock taking that we were doing earlier, before I distracted myself with the chubby toddler legs. The whole point of this chapter is that to even begin to try to criticize her actions as being out of character or not, we have to try to understand a few very crucial pieces of context to Katniss's early statements about children. 1. She is a child. She is literally a child. 2. She does not consider herself a child. 3. She considers children worthy of protection. And 4. She lives in a world where children and safety are concepts completely at odds with each other, and made intentionally so by her government. And, as we've already been discussing, it is Katniss's lack of ability to imagine a future where that last thing would not be the case that stops her from ever wanting or even allowing herself to think about it. So what does that actually telegraph here, considering that Peeta is not otherwise coercive to Katniss through the rest of the series and consistently acts with her best interests above his own, even when she doesn't trust him about it? Do we think that it telegraphs that he badgered and coerced and wore Katniss down until she reproduced for him like a good little barefoot and pregnant housewife? Or do we think maybe that what the line actually serves to telegraph is that without the 5, 10, 15 years, that it would be downright unbelievable to imagine that Katniss had gotten to the point where she could conceive of that kind of future? Not conceive like baby. You know what I mean. People focus so much on the "but Peeta wanted them so badly" portion of that line, but I think the part that they need to be focusing on is the 5, 10, 15. 15 years. Katniss Everdeen has children when she has lived for 15 years in a world without the Hunger Games, nearly as many years as she lived in a world with them. And this change in her belief about the future and her ability to imagine and trust in a safer and kinder one doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of an ability to see the new world that's been created as a result of so much suffering and sacrifice from so many, including and especially Katniss. All right, let's go ahead and read that epilogue. Maybe I should have put this at the beginning. Let me know. Does this structure work for you? I wanted to continue to dive deeper and deeper, right? Let's go ahead and read the epilogue.
They play in the meadow. The dancing girl with the dark hair and blue eyes, the boy with blonde curls and gray eyes, struggling to keep up with her on his chubby toddler legs. It took 5, 10, 15 years for me to agree, but Peeta wanted them so badly.
We've already discussed almost every line in here so far, but I do want to do a close reading here. Even just the descriptions of these children conveys to me both Katniss's protectiveness of them and the sort of peaceful life that they're able to live in this post-war District 12. We do not get their names, but we get enough to infer that they're happy. The dancing girl, chubby toddler legs. Of course, all of this was unimaginable enough to Katniss as a hungry child that she would shut the idea down completely. Of course, she would feel differently about it now. Obviously, as we've discussed, I do not think 5, 10, 15 implies coercion. I don't think it even implies constant pestering. I think she's agreeing specifically to Peeta wanting them so badly. And we will discuss Peeta more in my video about him. I still have to split some of this stuff off at some point, or else the video will be like 8 hours long. But I do feel certain that we know enough about Peeta Mellark and his abusive childhood to know that he would not want children who were not badly wanted by their mother. Let me continue reading.
When I first felt her stirring inside of me, I was consumed with a terror that felt as old as life itself. Only the joy of holding her in my arms could tame it. Carrying him was a little easier, but not much. The questions are just beginning. The arenas have been completely destroyed, the memorials built. There are no more Hunger Games, but they teach about them at school, and the girl knows we played a role in them. The boy will know in a few years. How can I tell them about that world without frightening them to death? My children, who take the words of the song for granted. Deep in the meadow, under the willow, a bed of grass, a soft green pillow. Lay down your head and close your sleepy eyes, and when again they open, the sun will rise. Here it's safe, here it's warm, here the daisies guard you from every harm. Here your dreams are sweet, and tomorrow brings them true. Here is the place where I love you.
So we get even more hints throughout this entire passage about how very loved and wanted these children are, and especially when we hold it up against our introduction to that lullaby being when Katniss sang it to Rue in the arena while she died, how protected these children are to be able to take the words in the song for granted. We're also told more of what happened in those 5, 10, 15 years. More of the sorts of things that could happen in society that might make Katniss feel like the peace everyone fought so hard for and sacrificed so much for could actually be something that lasts. And, of course, as I've been saying, Rue is all over this epilogue. Those are the lyrics to her lullaby. And also, I feel like you can see Rue just in this contrast here as this epilogue continues. This tentative and tenuous piece that you can at least try to sing a child to death with against the realities of that child death, or of the sort of world that keeps that kind of peace in the realms of daydreams and lullabies. The epilogue continues.
My children who don't know they play on a graveyard. PETA says it will be okay. We have each other and the book. We can make them understand in a way that will make them braver.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry to do this in the middle of the close reading chapter of my video, but I do actually need an entire bigger section when I can discuss the PETA says we can make them understand in a way that will make them braver line, because as you may have heard in my voice when I did the read, that's where I start to cry when I'm really sitting with this epilogue. I need to talk about other parts of this book for my reaction to that to make total sense, and I'm only reading from the epilogue in this section, so pin in that, but just for a little bit. Instead, let's talk about the "my children who don't know they play on a graveyard" line, another strong contender for a favorite line in the epilogue. Katniss doesn't take her children out to the woods, even now that there are no longer harsh boundaries around District 12. She might, she probably does sometimes, but not for the epilogue, not for the thing that Suzanne Collins wanted to have as the cap on this series. Not even mentioning the part where they don't yet know about it being a graveyard, just purely focusing on it being a graveyard here right now. The meadow in District 12 was turned into a mass grave following the firebombing of the district. Katniss, PETA, and Haymitch are three of something like 800 out of 8,000 or so people from District 12 who survived past the final night of the third quarter quell. The three of them, because they were in the capital / the arena, and everyone who Gale managed to lead out to safety in the woods to be rescued by District 13. Not all of whom I think it's reasonable to assume survived the war. Katniss and Haymitch returned to District 12 following Katniss's highly televised trial and live-streamed solitary confinement. Her mother does not return. We don't know about very many of the others. There are a few who are around in District 12 who are named. Like, we know that Deli's brother is there. I think we can also assume, though, that people might have wanted to go other places once that was allowed. That not all of the survivors of the firebombing came back to participate in the rebuilding, even if they did survive the war. Which, like, it's a huge bummer of a subject to bring up, but does feel relevant to this conversation about Katniss and PETA having children and what the implications of that are. It's actually pretty imperative to the continued survival of District 12 as a place, as a population, a people, and their physical descriptions being a mix of what's classed as seam and towny characteristics makes me feel even more sure that this is something that's intentionally important in the narrative. Katniss's merchant-class mother married a coal miner, and Katniss and Prim are split, one of them looking merchant and one of them looking seam. But Katniss and PETA's children don't divide like that. They aren't either merchant or seam. They're just from District 12. They're a new generation from a population that has been legitimately genocided, and I think that that's more meaningful than whatever empowering message people think would be gleaned from Katniss opting not to have children. But more on that and on these babies when we get to that section where I'm talking about PETA a little more. Let me finish reading the epilogue first.
But one day I'll have to explain about my nightmares. Why they came. Why they won't ever really go away. I'll tell them how I survive it. I'll tell them that on bad mornings, it feels impossible to take pleasure in anything because I'm afraid it could be taken away. That's when I make a list in my head of every act of goodness I've seen someone do. It's like a game. Repetitive, even a little tedious after more than 20 years. But there are much worse games to play.
It's just such a good epilogue. It's just so good. It's genuinely so good. It's thematically perfect. It ends on the perfect line. It is pretty much scientifically engineered to have equal parts bittersweet and outright sad. And also, it very much sets Katniss up as having overcome that inability to see a better future as possible. She not only sees it, but she trusts it. She believes in it enough to have chosen to bring babies into this world and not worry about them being hungry or being conscripted into the Hunger Games or being oppressed. Her fears are about frightening her children to death. That is so different from the fears that motivated her for so much of the first half of her life. I genuinely love this epilogue, and that probably shouldn't be surprising news to you by now. We've been hanging out for most of an hour already while I tell you how much I love this epilogue, but my therapist said it's probably a good idea to focus on a video topic that isn't quite as draining for a change, so we're gonna keep going. Chapter 4: Reasons why the epilogue does not bother me. Pulling again from that academic article, which also discusses the responses to the epilogue. The end of the Hunger Games trilogy is an ostensibly happy one, and yet a sense of instability remains. One reviewer on Amazon writes critically, "As for the fairy tale ending, I never needed one, at all." Another laments the lack of resolution, writing, "Collins tried to give us that in the epilogue, but it was forced and not sincere." For one reader, the happy ending scenario with Katniss and Kid is not happy at all, and I don't buy it. That felt empty and depressing. And another writes, "It's baffling to me that this tacked on ending is still fairy tale-esque. That is, Katniss did settle down with her true love and have children, but why bother giving her this semblance of a fairy tale ending? It's just empty." Two interesting strands emerge here. In these criticisms, either the ending is seen as forced and not sincere, an unworthy conclusion for the fiery Katniss, or it is read as straightforwardly happy, a fairy tale ending, and yet both are marked as unfulfilling. While this sample of reader response is in no way comprehensive or conclusive, it points toward an underlying tension in the finale of Collins's best-selling trilogy. These comments reveal a level of dissatisfaction with the trilogy's conclusion and offer a nice jumping-off point for my discussion here. Some of these comments point toward the false note which Katniss's tenuous happiness strikes. Still others express disappointment because the ending seems so unabatedly happy as to be unbelievable. Critical discourse on the Hunger Games has broadly pointed towards issues in the trilogy's conclusion, with Catherine R. Broad arguing that Katniss's resolution with Peeta, maternity, and domestic life undermines her standing as a feminist figure. For Broad, Katniss's cop-out ultimately reframes the way we read the rest of the novels, as it redirects the energy of the narrative from social upheaval to the maintenance of a reproductive status quo. The epilogue is enough to undercut the entirety of the radical narrative that has come before, and Katniss's rebellion serves to keep her an appropriately gendered, reproductive, and ultimately docile subject. This gendered reading of the Hunger Games trilogy is compelling and suggests a cogent reading for the dissatisfaction surrounding the conclusion. Indeed, many readers echo this notion on Goodreads and Amazon, lamenting Katniss's easy subsumation into the role of wife and mother. I felt like pulling from the paper again was a good way to introduce some of the other issues people voice about this epilogue. These are conversations that have been going on since the trilogy concluded in 2011. The paper I've been pulling from was published in 2014, and I am making this video in 2025, at a time when these conversations are still apparently happening. I do want to further unpack the idea that Katniss's arc is made less feminist by having babies at the end, but that needs its own chapter, and first I want to do the one I promised where I get to talk about my boy Peeta Mellark a little bit more. This is probably unsurprising at this point in the video too, but much like skipping over "but Peeta wanted them so badly" would feel like a gaping hole in a video that I want to otherwise have be pretty thorough, I feel I need to affirm, even beyond the fact that I've been kicking around a Peeta Mellark video in my head for at least a solid year now, that I love Peeta Mellark. I said earlier that I find the ship war angle of the epilogue wars to be the less interesting one, and that's true, but it doesn't mean that I think that that's avoidable here. One of the big reasons that the epilogue doesn't bother me, casting aside for now the reasons we've already been getting at, that I don't think it's out of character for Katniss's feelings about having children to change, and that I think what is actually in character is a protectiveness over and love for children, and also that her having children is thematically relevant and important for this series. Another reason here, though, is that I don't mind Katniss Everdeen having specifically Peeta Mellark's babies on account of I do just like these two together. I can't help it. It feels worth saying. I don't mind this epilogue because I don't mind this resting point for Katniss at the end of the series. I don't mind her ultimate choice, the correct choice. I believe that those choices would make her happy because I feel like she shows us again and again throughout the trilogy how crucial Peeta actually is to her happiness. I feel like I need to own up to being a Peeta girly here, right? Like, I have a Katniss flower tattoo, but it also very much does have a dandelion. Peeta Malark, the reason I lied to myself about my Kinsey placement for at least 2 years after realizing I was gay. I was never going to be angry that Katniss picked the boy she said, oh no, not him about, because I have been bought in on the two of them literally ever since. I wanted for Peeta to be the ultimate choice because I loved him, but also because at the time that I read The Hunger Games, I had also been reading whatever shitty YA I could get my hands on at that point, and being presented with an option that wasn't a broody, sullen, angry boy boyfriend was so incredibly refreshing to me. I love Peeta, and with the exception of the brainwashing in book 3, which is not his fault, Peeta is very nice to Katniss. The guy only ever really even gets temporary Meow Meow status, and I would argue that that's post-hijacking only and that he recovers. Don't you think, Jojo? Yeah. So I did want Peeta to be the ultimate choice, if I'm being honest. But me wanting Katniss and Peeta to end up together isn't even truly an actual point here. I like to joke that I think I'm personally more invested in the relationship between Katniss and Peeta as characters and as people than Suzanne Collins even ever was. Not that I think she disliked Peeta or that she didn't enjoy writing scenes where the two of them were together, just that I am that deeply invested in the relationship between Katniss Everdeen and Peeta Malark. And she was invested too. I mean, obviously so. The series was always headed here. Despite what people tell you, this isn't some random pair off so that everybody at the end of the series is in a happy domestic coupling. I promise we will end this section with the part of the epilogue that makes me cry, but I actually want to backtrack further first, now that we get to spend a little bit more time thinking about Peeta. Do you remember that scene I read from in Catching Fire earlier, where Katniss tries to soothe herself to sleep in the death pageant arena by imagining a world where Peeta's child could be safe? Imagining the epilogue. She imagines the epilogue, down to it being set in a meadow, and then she wakes with that brief, delicious feeling of happiness that is somehow connected to Peeta. Pulling again from Worst Games to Play.
Indeed, of all the central signifying objects throughout the trilogy, the evocation of the meadow as a site of play emerges with the full force of its many fraught connotations. In one of her few moments of peaceful dreaming during her second round in the arena, Katniss drifts off trying to imagine that world, somewhere in the future with no games, no capital, a place like the meadow in the song she sang to Rue as she died, where Peeta's child could be safe. And as Katniss watches her children play, it seems that perhaps she has finally found a way to make her dreams physically manifest, her final victory lying in the achievement of the meadow promised in her song. And yet again, the meadow here, in all its connotations of nature and the pastoral, is inseparable from the dying child's body, the lullaby she sang to Rue. Once again, the dream is inseparable from the horrors of the arena, even when this world, with no games, no capital, emerges as the desirable, indeed utopian conclusion to an otherwise brutally dystopian world.
So the meadow is there all along. Rue's memory is there all along. But this is something that I feel like does not get nearly enough credit in terms of ways where Katniss and Peeta always end up on the same page, and thus it's reasonable to assume they ended up on the same page in terms of wanting their children so badly as well. Let's talk about Peeta and Rue, because Peeta and Rue don't even interact, not that we see at least, and yet there is still so much that we can talk about here. And so it makes sense that it is his children specifically who are in this epilogue that Rue is all over. That scene in the first arena that I keep referencing, the other thing Katniss did that was revolutionary and that got turned into something actively rebellious and was interpreted as being as radical as it is, where Katniss gets on the same page as Peeta about their conversation from the night before the games. I want to talk about that a little bit more. So it's the night before the first games. Katniss and Peeta barely know each other at this point. He's already pulled the "she came here with me" stunt, which we will be discussing in my Peeta video because I'm already aware that I'm doing too many circle arounds here. Katniss finds him on the rooftop, though, after their interviews, and their interaction goes like this.
Thinking about your family? He asks. No, I admit, a bit guiltily. All I can do is wonder about tomorrow. which is pointless, of course. In the light from below, I can see his face now, the awkward way he holds his bandaged hands. I really am sorry about your hands. It doesn't matter, Katniss, he says. I've never been a contender in these games anyway. That's no way to be thinking, I say. Why not? It's true. My best hope is to not disgrace myself, and... He hesitates. And what? I say. I don't know how to say it exactly. Only... I want to die as myself. Does that make any sense? He asks. I shake my head. How could he die as anyone but himself? I don't want them to change me in there. Turn me into some kind of monster that I'm not. I bite my lip, feeling inferior. While I've been ruminating on the availability of trees, PETA has been struggling with how to maintain his identity, his purity of self. Do you mean you won't kill anyone? I ask. No. When the time comes, I'm sure I'll kill just like everybody else. I can't go down without a fight. Only, I keep wishing I could think of a way to show the Capitol they don't own me, that I'm more than just a piece in their games, says PETA. But you're not, I say. None of us are. That's how the games work. Okay, but within that framework, there's still you. There's still me, he insists. Don't you see? A little. Only... No offense, but who cares, PETA? I say. I do. I mean, what else am I allowed to care about at this point? He asks angrily. He's locked those blue eyes on mine now, demanding an answer. I'm going to read the rest of this conversation because I just love it, but I want to point that out. He's demanding an answer from her, and he gets one later. The rest of this conversation, as they're having it, it devolves, actually. Again, very similarly to the conversation between Katniss and Gale devolving towards the beginning of the video and the beginning of the series. It's the same dynamic here. PETA is presenting her with an idea that's a little bit grander than she's prepared for at this moment, and she shuts him down. She doesn't understand what he means yet. She doesn't understand this desire that he has to be more than a piece in their games. She doesn't understand anything but her desire to be safe and to get home to her sister, even as she's annoyed throughout training by PETA underrating himself and talking like he's willing to die. So Katniss does give PETA the actual answer that he's demanding later on in the arena, and we've already talked about it, but I am going to read that scene later. But at the time, as it continues, Katniss's actual out loud answer to him is a lot more defensive and self-protective. I take a step back. Care about what Haymitch said, about staying alive. PETA smiles at me, sad and mocking. Okay, thanks for the tip, sweetheart. It's like a slap in the face, his use of Haymitch's patronizing endearment. Look, if you want to spend the last hours of your life planning some noble death in the arena, that's your choice. I want to spend mine in District 12. Wouldn't surprise me if you do, says PETA. Give my mother my best when you make it back, will you? Count on it, I say. Then I turn and leave the roof. I spend the rest of the night slipping in and out of a doze, imagining the cutting remarks I will make to Peeta Mellark in the morning. Peeta Mellark. We will see how high and mighty he is when he's faced with life and death. He'll probably turn into one of those raging beast tributes, the kind who tries to eat someone's heart after they've killed them. I just love this scene. I just really love this scene. I'm absolutely going to have to talk about this scene and Peeta's side of it all in the other video, but let's stick with Katniss and Rue here, because like I said, Katniss's love of Rue, this transferable and inspiring and motivating love she has for her younger sister, is where she finally understands what Peeta meant on the rooftop. For a moment, I sit there, watching my tears drip down on her face. Rue's cannon fires. I lean forward and press my lips against her temple. Slowly, as if not to wake her, I lay her head back on the ground and release her hand. They'll want me to clear out now, so they can collect the bodies, and there's nothing to stay for. I roll the boy from District 1 onto his face and take his pack, retrieve the arrow that ended his life. I cut Rue's pack from her back as well, knowing she'd want me to have it, but leave the spear in her stomach. Weapons in bodies will be transported to the hovercraft. I've no use for a spear, so the sooner it's gone from the arena, the better. I can't stop looking at Rue. Smaller than ever, a baby animal curled up in a nest of netting. I can't bring myself to leave her like this, past harm but seeming utterly defenseless. To hate the boy from District 1, who also appears so vulnerable in death, seems inadequate. It's the Capitol I hate for doing this to all of us. Gale's voice is in my head, his ravings against the Capitol no longer pointless, no longer to be ignored. Rue's death has forced me to confront my own fury against the cruelty, the injustice they inflict upon us. But here, even more strongly than at home, I feel my impotence. There's no way to take revenge on the Capitol. Is there? Then I remember Peta's words on the roof. Only, I keep wishing I could think of a way to show the Capitol they don't own me, that I'm more than just a piece in their games. And for the first time, I understand what he means. I want to do something right here, right now, to shame them, to make them accountable, to show the Capitol that whatever they do or force us to do, there is a part of every tribute they can't own. That Rue was more than a piece in their games. And so am I. A few steps into the woods grows a bank of wildflowers. Perhaps they are really weeds of some sort, but they have blossoms in beautiful shades of violet and yellow and red. I gather up an armful and come back to Rue's side. Slowly, one stem at a time, I decorate her body in the flowers, covering the ugly wound, wreathing her face, weaving her hair with bright colors. They'll have to show it. Or, even if they choose to turn the cameras elsewhere at this moment, they'll have to bring them back when they collect the bodies, and everyone will see her then and know I did it. I step back and take a last look at Rue. She really could be asleep in that meadow after all. Bye, Rue, I whisper. I press the 3 middle fingers of my left hand against my lips and hold them out in her direction. Then I walk away without looking back. The birds fall silent. Somewhere, a mockingjay gives the warning whistle that precedes the hovercraft. I don't know how it knows. It must hear things that humans can't. I pause, my eyes focused on what's ahead, not what's happening behind me. It doesn't take long. Then the general bird song begins again, and I know she's gone. Another mockingjay, a young one by the looks of it, lands on a branch before me and bursts out Rue's melody. My song, The Hovercraft, were too unfamiliar for this novice to pick up, but it has mastered her handful of notes, the ones that mean she's safe. Good and safe, I say as I pass under its branch. We don't have to worry about her now. Good and safe.
That's her getting it. This is Katniss getting it. This is where we move from where I was saying earlier, I can't call her volunteering itself rebellious. This is her imagining a bigger picture, imagining at least a way that she could play into that bigger picture as something other than a pawn and a piece. And this is my favorite part. This is why, even though, yes, Gale's anger at the Capitol is something Katniss thinks about at this moment, I still find it more to be her getting on the same page as Peta, because it's Peta's words that spawn her into action here. And also because Peta later repeatedly answers her again about exactly this. Peta makes a speech on his victory tour. Again, something we're going to get more into in my video about him, I'm sorry. But he essentially, without asking advance permission because he knows it's not allowed, offers to pay a form of reparations to the families of Rue and Thresh, who is the other tribute from District 11 in their first arena. Thresh, actually, also somebody inspired by his affection for a child, and for Rue specifically. Thresh let Katniss go at the feast when she snuck away to get the medication for Peta's leg, which means that both Katniss and Peta would have died if Thresh had killed Katniss at the same time he killed Clove, but he let Katniss go, and explicitly for Rue. When Thresh whirls around on me, the rock raised, I know it's no good to run. And my bow is empty, the last loaded arrow having gone in Clove's direction. I'm trapped in the glare of his strange golden brown eyes. What'd she mean about Rue being your ally? We teamed up, blew up the supplies. I tried to save her, I did, but he got there first. District 1, I say. Maybe if he knows I helped Rue, he won't choose some slow, sadistic end for me. And you killed him? He demands. Yes, I killed him and buried her in flowers, I say, and I sang her to sleep. Tears spring in my eyes. The tension, the fight goes out of me at the memory, and I'm overwhelmed by Rue, and the pain in my head, and my fear of Thresh, and the moaning of the dying girl a few feet away. To sleep, Thresh says gruffly. To death? I sang until she died, I say. Your district, they sent me bread. My hand reaches up, but not for an arrow that I know I'll never reach, just to wipe my nose. Do it fast, okay, Thresh? Conflicting emotions cross Thresh's face. He lowers the rock and points at me, almost accusingly. Just this one time, I let you go. For the little girl. You and me. We're even then. No more owed. You understand? I nod because I do understand. About owing. About hating it.
I understand that if Thresh wins, he'll have to go back and face a district that has already broken all the rules to thank me. And he is breaking the rules to thank me too. And I understand that, for the moment, Thresh is not going to smash in my skull.
So now, post-arena, PETA at least also sort of understands about owing. He makes that offer to pay a month of his and Katniss's earnings out to the families of Thresh and Rue for the rest of their lives, and acknowledges that in no way could it make up for their losses. And because Haymitch and Katniss have not bothered to loop PETA in on the existing revolution brewing, PETA ended up playing into something much larger than he was aware he was actually doing. Somebody gets killed over this, somebody from District 11, somebody more marginalized than PETA, after the audience responds to Katniss and PETA with that same three-fingered salute that Katniss's district sent her off with, and after Rue's melody is whistled. Rue is all over not just the epilogue, but the entire revolution. And I don't particularly like very many things about the movies, but I did think that showing the uprising in District 11 after her death was such a good addition in that one of very few well-taken chances to get out of Katniss's head. But PETA's attempt at reparations and its disastrous unintended consequences is not the last time that PETA meets Katniss on this same page about Rue specifically. About, if you've read Sunrise on the Reaping, you'll know what I mean when I say wanting to paint their posters. He actually physically paints a poster on the floor! It just kills me! It just kills me. In Catching Fire, before the arena and after their private sessions with the game makers, PETA does paint a poster. He actually physically paints a poster on the floor. Let's move into that.
As we all gather for dinner, I notice PETA's hands are faintly stained with a variety of colors, even though his hair is still damp from bathing. He must have done some sort of camouflage after all. Once the soup is served, Haymitch gets right to the issue on everyone's mind. All right, so how did your private sessions go? I exchange a look with PETA. Somehow I'm not that eager to put what I did into words. In the calm of the dining room, it seems very extreme. You first, I say to him. It must have been really special. I had to wait for 40 minutes to go in. PETA seems to be struck with the same reluctance I'm experiencing. Well, I did the camouflage thing, like you suggested, Katniss. He hesitates. Not exactly camouflage. I mean, I used the dyes. To do what? Asks Portia. I think of how ruffled the game makers were when I entered the gym for my session. The smell of cleaners, the mat pulled over that spot in the center of the gym. Was it to conceal something they were unable to wash away? You painted something, didn't you? A picture. Did you see it? PETA asks. No, but they'd made a real point of covering it up, I say. Well, that would be standard. They can't let one tribute know what another did, says Effie, unconcerned. What did you paint, PETA? She looks a little misty. Was it a picture of Katniss? Why would he paint a picture of me, Effie? I ask, somehow annoyed. To show that he's going to do everything he can to defend you. That's what everyone in the Capitol's expecting, anyway. Didn't he volunteer to go in with you? Effie says, as if it's the most obvious thing in the world. Actually, I painted a picture of Rue, PETA says. How she looked after Katniss had covered her in flowers. There's a long pause at the table while everyone absorbs this. And what exactly were you trying to accomplish? Haymitch asks in a very measured voice. I'm not sure. I just wanted to hold them accountable, if only for a moment, says PETA, for killing that little girl. This is dreadful! Effie sounds like she's about to cry. That sort of thinking, it's forbidden, PETA. Absolutely. You'll only bring more trouble on yourself and Katniss. I have to agree with Effie on this one, says Haymitch. Portia and Cinna remain silent, but their faces are very serious. Of course, they're right. But even though it worries me, I think what he did was amazing. I guess this is a bad time to mention I hung a dummy and painted Seneca Crane's name on it, I say. This has the desired effect. After a moment of disbelief, all the disapproval in the room hits me like a ton of bricks. You hung Seneca Crane, says Cinna. Yes, I was showing off my new knot-tying skills, and he somehow ended up at the end of the noose, I say. Oh, Katniss, Effie says in a hushed voice. How do you even know about that? Is it a secret? President Snow didn't act like it was. In fact, he seemed eager for me to know, I say. Effie leaves the table with her napkin pressed to her face. Now I've upset Effie. I should have lied and said I shot some arrows. You'd have thought we planned it, says Peta, giving me just the hint of a smile. Didn't you? Asks Portia. Her fingers press her eyelids closed as if she's warding off a very bright light. No, I say, looking at Peta with a new sense of appreciation. Neither of us even knew what we were going to do before we went in.
My god, they are on the same page. Katniss and Peta are always on the same page. Other than the fact that they're both convinced that they should die to keep the other one alive, these two make it to the same page so much more frequently than Gale and Katniss ever do. Katniss and Peta are allies, they are friends, they are equals, and they are on the same goddamn page, even though nobody outside of the two of them is giving them enough information for them to truly do anything with it. Honestly, Katniss and Peta repeatedly inspiring each other and meeting each other on the same page, specifically about Rue, is something that can be so personal to me. And again, I've already said, the ship war basis here is less interesting to me, by which I mean I'm a little bit less concerned with arguing with people who agree that Katniss totally should have had babies, but just that they should have been with Gale instead. I will argue that point here, though, now, because there's not somebody else in this narrative who has earned a set of Rue-adjacent babies more than the only other person who went to efforts like Katniss did in the narrative to honor her. For the Meadow epilogue to make sense, the babies in it had to be Katniss and Peta's specifically. But yeah, honestly, let's go ahead and talk about the ship war thing. Let's talk about why I do not and cannot conceive of the Hunger Games as being a love triangle. And what I actually see the epilogue as, if not making good on making her pick a boyfriend at the end of the series. Alright, I've been trying to align the outfit changes with the chapter breaks, but I'm sorry, this video took me too many days to finish for that. We are still in reasons why the epilogue doesn't bother me territory. I know when I say the Hunger Games is not a love triangle, that people will argue with me. So just like I had to admit that Katniss did in fact tell Gale she never wanted to have children, I also must admit here that yes, the Hunger Games does have a love triangle, in that there are two boys with crushes on Katniss and who kiss her. One of those kisses is described as tasting like ashes and misery, and it's not the guy she ends up with, but she does kiss both guys. But a lot of the criticisms of this epilogue center around grievances with love triangles more generally. A frustration that they feel as though Katniss's entire story gets distilled down into the fact that she does, in fact, choose to be with a man at the end of it. Not even just choose to be with a man, but apparently, even worse to some, to have children with him by her own choice. As I've been working on this video, I keep having ideas for concepts for other Hunger Games videos I would love to make, and I think one that would be really fun would be to further argue this idea here that I'm so solid on, that the Hunger Games series, like the entire media, the series itself, the books, it is not actually a love triangle. It is a YA series about an oppressive government and an ensuing war, and it uses a lot of things as narrative tools to tell that story. But the Hunger Games trilogy is no more at its core a love triangle as the plot than it is a fake dating comedy, even though it also technically involves fake dating, and even though Katniss is funny as hell. Imagining the cutting remarks she will make to Peeta Mellark in the morning, I love her. I think the movies played up the love triangle to an almost absurd degree compared to the actual books, but I am intentionally trying not to let myself complain about the movies too much in this video, just for the sake of runtime. I cut myself off after I complained about the fence because I realized this video might become 4 hours long, and I don't currently have time for that. Lacey Green Part 2 is still coming, I promise. So, yes, there are two guys in this series who express interest in Katniss, but, and I know that this is something that somebody is already going to be trying to clock me in my comments for as being anti-feminist or whatever, for the purposes of today's discussion, I know that I have centered Katniss's romantic relationships way more in this video than she pretty much ever does in her narration. She doesn't really have the capacity to spend a lot of time actively caring about very much of this shit while it's going down. And also, I should say romantic relationship, singular, because honestly, even Gale says that kissing her while she's out of her mind with grief over Peeta doesn't count and is like kissing a drunk person. Okay, so trying not to get too deep into the weeds here. What I mean when I say that the Hunger Games is not a love triangle is that the presence of something resembling a love triangle is here, not as the plot of the story, but as a continuation of its narrative themes. And so a criticism that the book ended the way it did as if that was only to solve a contrived love triangle and not that the love triangle existed as a means to further the themes of the book misses that Suzanne Collins did in fact know what she was doing. I do have out-of-text evidence to cite from this from Suzanne herself, but I barely even need it, because Katniss's paragraph about settling down and finding comfort with PETA after he too returned to District 12 does it for us. Because, I mean, this is probably going to sound really mean, but also I feel like this video makes it clear how passionate I am about these books, so forgive me, but Suzanne Collins did write them for children, right? She made it pretty obvious. In the last chapter, Katniss says,
"What I need to survive is not Gale's fire, kindled with rage and hatred. I have plenty of fire myself. What I need is the dandelion in the spring, the bright yellow that means rebirth instead of destruction, the promise that life can go on, no matter how bad our losses, that it can be good again. And only PETA can give me that."
And Suzanne Collins, queen that she is, thank you, Suzanne, has done incredibly few interviews about her world and her series. But when she spoke up about the themes in a 2018 interview, it being a super dreamy teen romance didn't exactly come up. She says,
"I knew I wanted to continue writing about just war theory for young audiences. In the Underland Chronicles, I'd examined the idea of an unjust war developing into a just war because of greed, xenophobia, and long-standing hatreds. For the next series, I wanted a completely new world and a different angle into the just war debate.
And when she's asked to expand, she said,
Just war theory has evolved over thousands of years in an attempt to define what circumstances give you the moral right to wage war and what is acceptable behavior within that war and its aftermath, the why and the how. It helps differentiate between what's considered a necessary and an unnecessary war. In the Hunger Games Trilogy, the districts rebel against their own government because of its corruption. The citizens of the district have no basic human rights, are treated as slave labor, and are subjected to the Hunger Games annually. I believe the majority of today's audience would define that as grounds for revolution. They have just cause, but the nature of the conflict raises a lot of questions. Do the districts have the authority to wage war? What is their chance of success? How does the reemergence of District 13 alter the situation? When we enter the story, Panem is a powder keg and Katniss the spark."
and if my quote pull from Mockingjay was not convincing enough, here's what she said about Gale and PETA, in her own words, not my interpretation.
PETA and Gale appeared quickly, less as 2 points on a love triangle, more as two perspectives in the just war debate. Gale, because of his experiences and temperament, tends toward violent remedies. PETA's natural inclination is towards diplomacy. Katniss isn't just deciding on a partner, she's figuring out her worldview.
And so, what would Katniss's choice signify in the end if her choice was to be alone? Does it make sense why I'm so unpersuaded by arguments that try to insist that her final choice was the wrong one and that she actually should have chosen some secret third option of being by herself in the end? That we could pretend pairing her with somebody else just so we can eat our fem/veggies makes more sense in the actual canon of the books and not just our hearts, and actually genuinely claim superiority over canon for that? Katniss Everdeen, faced with a choice between violence and diplomacy, presented with an opportunity to have hope in the future for the first time, opting instead, what? To live frozen in the past so she and her memories can die out in the name of bucking established standard industry endings and earning some points on the most surface level reading of the books imaginable? And I do think that's lazy. And I haven't really touched this yet, but I do think that while motherhood should not, as a default, be exonerated in feminism, that it is a little bit anti-feminist and reductive to say with your whole chest, or fingers on your keyboard, or wherever that paper about Katniss's cop-out was published, that someone is less feminist on the basis of reproduction. That sucks. That's shitty feminism. We're getting to that. I'm not less annoyed by that just because I'm arguing primarily on the merits of what's inside the children's book first. I, personally, Ophi YouTube videos, feminist and lesbian, I do not think that women who have children are less feminist. Amen. But talking about what Suzanne is trying to accomplish in these books is also why I wanted to wait for a bit to unpack the way I feel about the PETA says it will be okay, we have each other, and the book, we can make them understand in a way that will make them braver line, which is the one that does actually make me tear up when I read the epilogue for the first time in a while. Not only is it so clear that them having each other is crucial to them being okay, them having each other and their memory book, but also it's the idea that their children can be made to understand in a way that makes them braver and how beautiful that is, how hopeful and gentle and also possible. That's the hope Katniss and PETA have, and it's a hope that seems reasonable enough for these two who have been put through so much to put their faith in and bring children into the world. This series in particular is probably the only one I can think of where I could be persuaded to care so much about the choice to have happy, safe babies at the end. Babies who will be raised with the memory of all that was sacrificed and lost and gone before their time. They'll grow up with songs from District 12, songs that were sung to Rue in the arena as she died. And they'll grow up with parents who love them, who want them so badly, who understand more than anyone else ever could what the other one has been through because they went through all of it together. And they're babies who will be braver for the way that they're raised, who will be kinder and gentler because they live in a kinder and gentler world and are raised with parents who know what it's like when that kindness and gentleness is not there. The amount of themes in this story that these children pull to a conclusion make being annoyed by their existence just feel silly to me. The meadow ending, the thing Katniss tried to soothe herself to sleep in the arena with, a safe and warm and guarded childhood with chubby toddler legs and music like Katniss also had in her early childhood. And also children and their innocence at all as a major theme, children and mortality by having these children in specific play on a graveyard, games themselves by having them play outside in nature and by having them eventually learn about the little game Katniss plays in her head. But there's another theme here too that they're making good on, right? Remember I said earlier we had to talk about the fake pregnancy. I'm rolling that together right now with the general theme of real or not real, which is of course the game Katniss and Peeta play after his hijacking when he can't discern which of his memories are real or not real. But it's also just a theme of the entire series. It's a huge theme in Sunrise on the Reaping as well, one of the things Suzanne was very concerned with exploring. And so Peeta lies about Katniss having a baby, and he tells this lie after about half a book full of Katniss worrying about the threat of what would happen if they did have a baby in their capital designated marriage, which in that context would have been actual reproductive coercion, not on Peeta's part, but on the part of the government mandating them to have children. If that did happen, and it most likely would have, given the context clues, that's bad. I would not have loved Katniss having children in that situation, even if she grew to love them. But that did not happen. It was a fear she had. And when Peeta cries after the if it weren't for the baby stunt, she wonders if he's been sharing her fears all this time about what would happen to their child if they were forced to have one. So there's a not real baby. It was referenced earlier in the passage we read from Catching Fire. I need to talk about the if it weren't for the baby stunt in a video where I'm letting myself complain about the movies a little bit more. Josh Hutcherson, when I get you. But Katniss being able to take these things, the forced marriage to Peeta and the concept of being made to have children just to feed them into the reaping ball, into the Hunger Games, into the meat grinder of the capital's exploitation, and then she subverts them. And it's something that happens twice. The first time that the concept of this not real marriage is subverted is on the stage of the interviews, when Katniss is turned into a Mockingjay. Snow wants to humiliate her by forcing her to wear her wedding gown for her final interview, and then Cinna turns her into a Mockingjay, the symbol of the revolution. Peeta then also subverts this expected humiliation by turning another layer of deception against the Capitol this time. Actually, we did get married. You didn't get to be part of it, and now you're going to lose our unborn baby too, right after the other tributes all got you all primed to riot. What do you think of that? And that's amazing. That's actually revolutionary, and that happens without Katniss's involvement or approval. She's on board with it after it happens, but neither Peeta or Cinna clear it with her ahead of time, and only Peeta asks if he has anything to apologize for. But then it is Katniss. The next time that these not real things, the marriage, the baby, all that concept is subverted is Katniss. It's when she turns it into something real. When Katniss has the freedom to choose and she makes this choice anyway, and when Peeta does the same. Katniss has no choice about returning to District 12. That's part of her sentencing for killing Coin. But Peeta does. Peeta chooses to go home, and he goes home as soon as he gets the chance to. He chooses to be with her. They choose to stay together, to have something real, to live up to their promises to always stay with each other, and to Katniss asking Peeta not to let Snow take him from her. Like, we have chapters and chapters of Peeta's safety and the ability to protect Peeta and be with Peeta being such a motivating thing for Katniss. She gets that. That's what she wants, and she gets it. And I think that's beautiful, and I love that for them. So how come people read that and get mad when I think it's so beautiful it makes me actually cry? Chapter 5, Lonely Girlboss Feminism versus Media Literacy. In my video last year about how much I love the musical Rent, I talked about how frustrated I get with critiques of media that want to pretend to have outsmarted it. The sort of arguments that come from somebody hearing a well-reasoned argument and then telephone gaming it, and then, even worse, applying it to another piece of media where it doesn't even apply. That certainly happens here with the Hunger Games. This certainly happens here, where people will apply their frustrations about another character the motherhood thing wouldn't actually make sense for to Katniss. And so that frustration that I have, where I feel like people are telling me that they outsmarted Rent when they have not, is a frustration I also feel about criticisms of the Hunger Games. I don't think any reverse-engineered ending I've been pitched would work better than the one that the series was working towards the entire time. So I want to circle back around to some of the sort of criticisms that were mentioned in that paper we were reading. The ones that claim that Katniss's decision to have babies and enjoy a domestic life at the end of the series is somehow anti-feminist or less feminist than it would be to not have children. The argument here, if we can oversimplify for the sake of disassembling it, is that Katniss was a very strong figure, a feminist figure, a strong female character, and she ends the series unstrong by having babies, which undoes all of the strength we've already seen and cheapens it. And I don't think I read the same books as those people. No argument from me whatsoever that Katniss Everdeen is a strong female character. She's literally a revolutionary. But I want to call our attention to the things Katniss does in the books that are revolutionary. And I've spoken about a few of these already. Volunteering for her sister, the flower burial for Rue, even holding out the berries and threatening to eat them with Peeta at the end of the games when the rule change is revoked. These are all big iconic moments for Katniss. And they are all motivated actually by love and compassion and not by being a badass, hard-ass girl boss who wants to try to look tough. In my head, this subchapter has been called the Katniss isn't a girl boss section. So in Mockingjay, there's a passage that genuinely just proves this. In District 13, Haymitch notices that Katniss is not able to be coached into making an effective propaganda spot in a television studio. So he gathers people who know her for a meeting to try to make his pitch that they should send her out into the field and let her actually react to things. So let's all be quiet for a minute. I want everyone to think of one incident where Katniss Everdeen genuinely moved you. Not where you were jealous of her hairstyle, or her dress went up in flames, or she made a halfway decent shot with an arrow. Not when Peeta was making you like her. I want to hear one moment where she made you feel something real. Quiet stretches out, and I'm beginning to think it will never end when Levi speaks up. When she volunteered to take Prim's place at the reaping, because I'm sure she thought she was going to die. Good. Excellent example, says Haymitch. He takes a purple marker and writes on a notepad. Volunteered for sister at reaping. Haymitch looks around the table. Somebody else. I'm surprised that the next speaker is Boggs, who I think of as a muscular robot that does Coin's bidding. When she sang the song, when the little girl died. Somewhere in my head an image surfaces of Boggs with a young boy perched up on his hip. In the dining hall, I think. Maybe he's not a robot after all. Who didn't get choked up at that, right? Says Haymitch, writing it down. I cried when she drugged Peeta so she could go get him medicine, and when she kissed him goodbye, blurts out Octavia. Then she covers her mouth, like she's sure this was a bad mistake. But Haymitch only nods. Oh yeah, drugs Peeta to save his life. Very nice. The moments begin to come on thick and fast, and in no particular order. When I took Rue on as an ally, extended my hand to Chaff on interview night, tried to carry Mags. And again, when I held out those berries that meant different things to different people. Love for Peeta, refusal to give up under impossible odds, defiance of the capital's inhumanity. Remember, I said we would talk about the ways that Katniss really is revolutionary, and we are, right now. Everything that was listed in that scene was revolutionary, and it was not revolutionary in a scowly, angry, shooty girl boss way. It was revolutionary because of her love for her fellow tribute, her fellow child, for her sister. Revolutionary because she keeps that humanity in the face of the arena, even when she felt so inferior that Peeta had been thinking about it more actively than she had. Katniss's revolutionary acts are acts of love, of gentleness, not of being an angry and lonely teenage girl, even though she also was an angry and lonely teenage girl. The entire point of this world, of the way that Panem is set up, of the way that these people are oppressed, is that Katniss's love itself is what is revolutionary, what is radical, what finally manages to light the fuse that people have been trying to get into this powder keg for the last several decades. And so, what would the point of the series be if it was not that Katniss's love and gentleness gets rewarded in the end? What would the moral of the Hunger Games be? Even casting aside what we've already discussed about the love triangle and its actual meaning, I just think it would be incredibly unsatisfying to set up a character who's so capable and ready to give love, deciding not to do anything with it, just in case a Goodreads reviewer might be annoyed she ends the series with a baby and husband. I don't understand what the point of the series would be if it didn't end with the Happy Babies epilogue, because not only would we not be given any real assurance that there's a reason to trust Plutarch's little "what if this is the evolution of the human race" line in his last appearance, but because they are the most solid evidence that we could possibly be given to believe that this world is safe. But also because they are a reward for Katniss specifically. They are a thing she gets to have that she couldn't even let herself want before, a new family, a way that she gets to share in this new world that she suffered so much for the creation of. I feel that without capping the series off with this perfect, beautiful wrap up of so many of its themes, the point of the Hunger Games series would be there was a country that did really terrible things to its citizens, and especially the children. And there was a war that happened because Katniss Everdeen is so special and she suffered so much. And then everyone who survived but her got to reap the rewards of her suffering, because it's more realistic for her to mourn forever than to accept that some people both continue to mourn and also have a family and a life in the future. I also want to note that there are certainly other series where a baby's ending is forced or tacked on. That there is media I've watched where it's very clear everyone is being slotted into a happy and assumedly reproductive heterosexual couple just for the sake of tying the story off at the end. Or when a woman has a baby and you realize the author was in fact sort of implying all women either want to be or should be mothers. I don't think that's what Suzanne Collins did here, though, and I think you have to miss a lot of the groundwork that she very intentionally laid just to maintain the same level of anger that you're justified at feeling about Toph Beifong becoming a cop. I feel like coming at the Hunger Games for being pro-natalist by way of having a character who deeply cares about children throughout have children at the end is a weird holdover of being angry at books that actually are pro-natalist in theme. I could do an entire video just about this. I'm sure people already have, though. The second to last Twilight movie is basically anti-abortion propaganda. There are some real attempts made to do a feminist reading of Twilight, right? To say that it's actually a story about a young woman expressing autonomy, and isn't that beautiful because she knows what she wants and she gets it, meaning the vampirism. But what she wants is a relationship with a vampire who is very coercive and manipulative to her for a lot of the books, and then she wants to become a vampire, but then suddenly something supersedes her wish to become a vampire with Edward, which is to have Edward's baby first, and maybe die in the process if she has to. Breaking Dawn is deeply unsubtle about being pro-life propaganda. It is framed as the correct, the imperative thing to do for Bella to have the demon spawn baby who is literally breaking her bones from inside of her and killing her. What the second to last Twilight movie does is take a horror movie concept of a succubus baby, mixes it with the sort of situation where even many pro-forced birth hardliners would consider an abortion, in that Bella is literally dying from her pregnancy, and it frames it as a moral imperative that Bella must keep and love this fetus. And not only Bella, other people are also charmed by the fetus before it's even born. Edward wants Bella to have an abortion at first, but once he can read Renesmee's mind, he changes his own about that. There's a line in the movie, too, where Rosalie is like, just call it what it is, it's just a little baby. I would not roll my eyes at somebody who told me that the reason the Renesmee plot plays out the way it does is because Stephanie Myers believes that your married characters need to have or at least long for babies. Because that's what I think Breaking Dawn is kind of about. Breaking Dawn is pro-forced birth propaganda, and then it pays off the other side of the love triangle that plays much more as plot than as furtherance of plot by making the shapeshifter be soulmates with the newborn. It just sucks. It's just so terrible. Please comment if you want a video about Breaking Dawn Part 1 as pro-forced birth horror, because I am forcing myself to move on. To claim that Katniss is made less feminist by right of having children is ridiculous in the face of any actual media literacy, on the face of actually examining the themes of the book and what they and Katniss herself think about children. But it's also ridiculous in the face of actual feminism. I have defended Chapel Roan for upwards of an hour on a live stream about her recently controversial statements on motherhood. I have, and I will say that I think feminism cannot and should not elevate the concept of motherhood to some position that is safe from any criticism or critique. I'm not here to make the argument that motherhood and parenting is an inherently feminist act. In fact, probably more often than not, women are enforcing patriarchal norms on their children just as much as the fathers are. We live in a society that is enforced and ingrained in all of us, and where the labors that mothers do in particular is both devalued and expected. And one more argument about the books in particular here. Katniss and Peeta are a team who are over and over again on the same page, and also the country that they live in has had a radical restructuring in the last 20 years. So holding our own current understanding of gender dynamics up to say that Katniss is actually upholding a reproductive status quo and becoming barefoot and pregnant, and therefore less of an important person in her own narrative, feels misguided to me. They could abolish the Hunger Games, but you don't think Katniss and Peeta can raise their children in a household where gender roles aren't being rigidly enforced? Peeta is a baker. But the argument I will actually make about parenthood, about reproducing and motherhood in specific, is that it can be neutral, and it in fact often is. I mean, a trad wife pumping out 6 children with themed names to exploit on social media and call a ministry is not a politically neutral act, but I don't feel as though most people who opt to have babies do so for political reasons. And nobody needs to worry for sure about repopulation right now so that our species doesn't die out or anything, but people having kids, if we really, really zoom out, is literally how humans stay alive. It is a thing that will continue to happen. Yes, people should not be forced into said reproduction. That is a very basic, easy feminist take here. But I don't think any of the context clues that make Katniss's fears around having children in Panem before she went into her first games, or her fears about being forced to have children with Peeta if they were to be fake married by the Capitol, would still exist at the time that she does want to have children. So I don't think she's being forced either not to think about it or to think about it. I think this is the first time she has full autonomy over that. I think it's surface level weird and like a useless anti-natalist in specific clickbait BuzzFeed feminism to disregard something purely on the basis that you think a character would be more feminist had you gotten your way on them being a hashtag child-free icon, even when that's clearly not what was being set up. I think it's especially weird to do a surface level analysis on Katniss Everdeen and then deem her improperly feminist for you. I don't think the question is whether or not Katniss is feminist enough, but whether or not she's specifically feminist at all. Katniss is in survival mode, and she doesn't really stop to think about whether or not she's being oppressed on the basis of her gender. When she engages in solidarity, it seems to be more on the basis of being district class than of being girl class. Katniss Everdeen is a strong character, and she is a girl, and I don't think the Hunger Games books are anti-feminist at all, but I think misogyny is not one of the main forces of oppression that Katniss is pushing against, or at least that it's not a thing that she would even have a word for. So now she's being held to a standard of a thing that she has no conception of, and then people knock points off of her grade for somehow failing to live up to it. As was pointed out on my Patreon when I posted a preview of this video, it's actually kind of hilarious to resent Katniss for not appropriately living up to the figurehead position that you've assigned to her. That's kind of what happens to her over and over again in the trilogy as well. She is not given agency, not given the freedom to make her own choices, just pushed into representing something she's not all that interested in representing. And honestly, at the end of all of that, once she has a moment, 5, 10, 15 years worth of moments to catch her breath, I just can't resent her for her choice. I think I'd have to ignore way too much of the books to do that. My friend Marty pointed out as I was finishing up this video how interesting it is that so many of the criticisms against the epilogue actually fall under the sorts of things I discussed in my video about 4B, and the ways that feminist separatism often fails. On the one hand, yeah, it's truly not all that deep. This is a children's book, and the fact that we've been here for about 2 hours by now while I have made my case about the epilogue being good might, in retrospect, be a little bit overkill. But also, I do think it's interesting. I think it reflects the sort of feminism that wants to get a little bit angry about something but provide no root for change. That has no empathy for the fact that it's a lot to ask somebody who doesn't even know what feminism is to put some nebulous feminist movement above their own happiness, especially if they are in fact safe and do in fact feel safe. And Katniss does feel safe with Peeta. She talks all the time about him comforting her after her nightmares. So assigning her some responsibility to completely denounce her alliance with her district partner who she loves just for the sake of proving that that's an option is silly. And it's silly in a way that people sometimes pretend to want to hold real life women to. I don't think you're less of a feminist if you're a mother and if your other parent of your children is a man. I don't think Katniss Everdeen is, but most importantly, I also don't think real actual people are either. I do think you're less feminist if you think of something as already as stigmatized and gendered as motherhood somehow detracting from the other sum of parts that make up a person. I think there are lots of women and lots of people who happen to have children who are every bit as feminist as I am, or even more so. I'm also saying all of this as somebody who is almost entirely certain I don't want to have children. I am at this point in making video essays and being a feminist on the internet, getting sort of used to the worst faith readings of me being what people go with. So I don't think I'll even be truly surprised if I start hearing that they're over there saying I'm saying everyone needs to have babies to heal and to move forward from their trauma, even though that is very much not what I'm saying. It's not that every character or every woman must have children, it's that this entire trilogy sets us up for it to be a nice thing when this specific one does, in these specific circumstances. Clearly, I love these books. I'm planning on doing a full series reread and making content and doing live streams about it as I do. If you've been thinking about rereading, I think it would be really fun to do that together. I loved Sunrise on the Reaping. I recorded a really quick, messy review of it that night that you can find on my Patreon if you're interested. Thank you so much also to my Patreon supporters, a few of whose names you can see on the screen right now. Patreon is a great way to help support me financially, and you also get a couple of extra videos a month, and when I'm working on a long one like this that gets done in drafts, I'll sometimes toss up an unfinished version early. Thank you so much also to everyone who has donated to me on Coffee and who super chats me during my live streams. All of that is such an enormous help. I have not been able to make as many videos the last few weeks as I have been in recent months because I haven't had as many hours I can spend awake. And since this is the only job I can handle with my disability, it genuinely has made all the difference in the world to have that on top of the support that I already get from people just watching my videos all the way through to the end. I love you. I'll be back soon. I'm really planning on being here more than twice this month. Bye.